There were only 3 hours left until her dream wedding, when she discovered the betrayal. But what happened next, no one could have imagined. Natalie Evans thought she had it all, the perfect fiancé, the perfect life, the perfect future, until she walked into a moment that shattered everything she believed in. Heartbreak can destroy you, or it can rewrite your story. Hers began the second she met a stranger at a bar, a man whose calm confidence hid his own chaos. Julian Hayes wasn't looking for love. He was a millionaire with too much control and not enough peace. What started as a deal between two broken souls soon blurred into something neither could walk away from. It wasn't just about revenge or redemption anymore. It was about discovering what's real when everything else falls apart. So, what happens when betrayal leads you straight into destiny? Let's find out. Natalie couldn't stop smiling that morning. She had just picked up her wedding dress and was on her way to the salon. On her drive, she stopped at his favorite bakery to buy a small chocolate cake with raspberry filling, his favorite. It was her way of saying, "We made it." A little surprise before the big moment. The house door was unlocked when she arrived, which didn't seem odd. She stepped inside, humming, imagining his face when he saw her. But halfway through the stairs, she froze. Laughter echoed from the bedroom. His voice mixed with another, a familiar female voice, her maid of honor. Her chest tightened. Each step up felt heavier than the last. When she reached the door, she didn't need to open it wide. The reflection in the mirror told her everything. He was there, shirt half open, smiling as her best friend whispered something in his ear. Then came the words that crushed her. "She really thinks she's living a fairy tale." The cake box slipped from her hands, landing with a soft, broken thud. The sweet smell filled the air, mixing with betrayal. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply turned around and walked away, her heart beating louder than their laughter behind her. Natalie didn't remember unlocking the car door. Her hands just moved on their own. The moment she sat down, silence swallowed everything. The laughter, the smell of chocolate, the image of him, gone yet echoing inside her. She stared at the cake frosting smeared on her sleeve, a ridiculous reminder of how real this all was. The city blurred past the windshield. She didn't have a plan, not even a destination. Her wedding playlist still played through the car speakers, the song they were supposed to dance to. She turned it off halfway, unable to breathe. It was strange how heartbreak could make the world look both louder and emptier at the same time. At a red light, she noticed her reflection in the mirror. Messy hair, mascara smudged, veil still in the passenger seat. She almost laughed at the irony. 3 hours ago, she was a bride. Now she looked like a ghost wearing hope as makeup. Her chest burned, but the tears wouldn't come. When the light turned green, she pressed harder on the gas. The streets of Chicago felt endless, yet freeing. For the first time, she wasn't driving toward someone. She was driving away. The wedding was off. The future she built in her head was gone. By the time Natalie pulled over, the sun had already started to fade. She didn't even know how she ended up outside a small downtown bar, the kind of place people visit to forget birthdays and bad decisions. Inside, soft jazz hummed through the air. She took a seat at the counter, her wedding veil still folded in her purse. "Rough day?" the bartender asked, sliding her a glass of water before she even ordered. She let out a shaky laugh. "You have no idea." When he returned with a drink, she didn't hesitate. The first sip burned. The second felt like permission to stop pretending everything was fine. She started talking, not in full sentences, just fragments, about trust, about plans that vanished in one afternoon, about chocolate cakes that didn't fix anything. The bartender listened quietly, nodding, refilling her glass. And 2 seats away, a man in a sharp navy suit watched her, not intrusively, but with quiet curiosity. He looked out of place there, too polished, too composed. Yet something in her chaos seemed to draw him in. Julian Hayes didn't know who she was, but her broken honesty caught him off guard. When she finally met his eyes, he offered a small, genuine smile. It was the first human kindness she'd seen all day. The next drink wasn't supposed to happen, but Natalie sat back down, claiming she wasn't ready to face the silence yet. Julian raised a brow, amused. "Silence can be productive," he said. "Not tonight," she replied. Her laughter carried that edge between heartbreak and freedom, the kind people get when they've already lost everything. She told him she was supposed to be on her honeymoon in less than 24 hours. He smirked. "You don't look like the honeymoon type." She shrugged, tapping her glass. "Not anymore." The air between them felt lighter, tragic and funny all at once. "I should probably just marry a stranger next time," she said. At least I'd expect the disaster, Julian chuckled, then leaned back, studying her with curiosity. A stranger, huh? He asked, lifting his drink. What if one happens to be sitting next to you right now? She looked at him, caught off guard by his tone, not playful, not serious, somewhere in between. Deal, she said, laughing, toying with the idea like it was just another joke. But he didn't laugh. He simply clinked his glass against hers. Then it settled. Natalie rolled her eyes, smiling at the absurdity. Still, when she left the bar that night, the word deal echoed in her mind. Something about his calm confidence felt dangerous, not in a bad way, but in a way that made her wonder what he wasn't telling her. Natalie woke to the sound of her phone buzzing. 12 missed calls, 5 messages, and 1 brutal reality check. The wedding had come and gone without her, replaced by pity texts and unanswered questions. She rubbed her temples, trying to remember how much she'd actually drunk the night before. The sunlight felt too bright, the world too real. Her purse lay open on the nightstand, and tucked between lipstick and receipts was a business card. Julian Hayes, CEO, Hayes & Co. She frowned, running her finger over the embossed letters. For a man who'd seemed so casual, the title screamed control and power. Of course, she muttered. Another corporate Prince Charming? She didn't plan to call him. Not after everything. But her mind replayed their conversation, his calm voice, that strange sense of comfort he carried. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe she just needed to feel seen again. Either way, she found herself staring at his number longer than she should have. When she finally threw the card back in her bag, she swore she was done with him. Done with men. Done with the idea of love. Still, as she walked out of her apartment, her reflection in the elevator mirror smirked like it knew better. Somewhere deep down, she sensed that the deal she joked about wasn't over yet. Julian Hayes never planned on going back to that bar, but that morning he sat in his glass-walled office on the 40th floor of Hayes & Co., staring at the city skyline and at the ultimatum lying on his desk. "Marry before the quarter ends," his father's voice echoed from the call earlier, "or you'll lose control of the company." It wasn't a threat. It was a guarantee. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Marriage wasn't in his plans. Not now, not ever. He'd spent his life turning emotions into strategy, love into distraction. Still, his father's grip on the board was strong, and for the first time, Julian realized logic alone wouldn't save him. He needed a move no one would see coming. As the morning dragged on, his mind kept drifting back to the woman at the bar, the one with the shattered heart and sarcastic grin. She had no idea who he was, and that alone intrigued him. No pretense, no filters, just brutal honesty. Maybe that's why her words had stuck with him. I should probably just marry a stranger next time. Julian smiled faintly, the kind of smile that usually meant trouble. He picked up his phone, dialing his assistant. "Get me the name of that bar from last night." A pause. "Yes, I'm serious." As the city buzzed beneath his office, a reckless idea began to form, one that would rewrite both of their lives before either of them saw it coming. 2 days later, Natalie was sitting in a small coffee shop downtown, laptop open, pretending to care about job listings she'd never apply for. Her wedding bouquet still wilted on her kitchen counter back home, a quiet reminder of everything she'd lost. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and she didn't even bother looking up. Not until a familiar voice said her name. "Miss Evans?" The tone was calm, precise, corporate, but not cold. When she looked up, Julian Hayes stood there, the same navy suit, the same unreadable expression. For a second, she thought she was hallucinating. "You again?" she said, trying to sound annoyed. He smiled. "You could say that fate and I have a deal." He sat across from her, sliding a file across the table. 1 year, he said, a fake marriage, no strings, no emotions. You help me keep my company, I help you start over. She blinked, stunned. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Not really," he replied. "Just business." His voice was too steady for her to think he was bluffing. Natalie laughed, a little too loudly for the quiet cafe. "You're insane," she said. "Maybe," he answered, "but I keep my promises." She looked at the contract again, then at him. There was something dangerous about how calm he seemed. "So what do you say?" he asked softly. She exhaled. "You really need a wife that bad?" His smirk was slow, confident. "You have no idea." By the next morning, Natalie still couldn't believe she'd signed the contract. Her best friend thought she'd lost her mind. "You're marrying a man you barely know," she yelled over coffee. Natalie just shrugged. "Technically, I'm marrying his last name. And his money," she added, half joking, half honest. Deep down, even she wasn't sure what she'd just agreed to. Julian was all business when she arrived at his office to finalize the details. Public appearances, board dinners, interviews, you'll need to play the role, he explained, sliding a list across his desk. She raised a brow. What happens if I improvise? Don't, he replied simply. That calm tone somehow both infuriating and fascinating. They argued about everything, wardrobe, schedules, even how she should smile in photos. You can't script a person, Julian, she snapped. You'd be surprised, he said, walking away. Still, there were moments, small, unguarded, when he'd catch himself watching her, like he'd forgotten this was pretend. That night, when she moved into his penthouse, he greeted her with a smirk. Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes. She rolled her eyes but couldn't help laughing. Don't get used to it. Too late, he said, disappearing down the hall. She stood there for a moment, suitcase in hand, realizing this ridiculous deal might be the most unpredictable decision of her life. Julian's penthouse looked like something out of a magazine. Glass walls, expensive art. Not a single thing out of place. Natalie stepped inside, feeling instantly out of sync with the perfection around her. Do you actually live here? She asked. Or is this an exhibit? He gave a faint smile. I live here. You just can't tell. He handed her a list of house rules, literally printed and laminated. No shoes in the living room, no loud music, no guests, and no chocolate in the study, he added. She blinked. That's oddly specific. It stains the furniture, he replied, dead serious. She stared at him like he was a robot programmed by luxury brands. For the first few days, they barely spoke. She broke rules without trying, left coffee rings on his marble counters, turned on music while she cooked, talked to his staff like they were friends. It drove him crazy. You really enjoy chaos, don't you? He said one night. It's called living, she shot back. But something began to shift in the silence between their arguments. He started leaving her coffee the way she liked it. Extra cream, no sugar. She noticed he worked late, but always paused when she laughed. One night she caught him standing in the hallway, watching her try to fix a broken lamp. Their eyes met, and for a second, neither of them moved. Whatever this was, fake, temporary, complicated, it was starting to feel dangerously real. Julian's father didn't believe in casual dinners. Every meal was a business negotiation served on crystal plates. The long dining table could have hosted 20 people, but tonight there were only 4. Julian, Natalie, his father, and his perfectly composed mother. So this is your wife, Mr. Hayes said, scanning Natalie like she was an investment report. Natalie sat straighter, trying not to fidget under his gaze. Yes, sir, she said politely. His father leaned back. Didn't think you'd marry someone outside our circles. Julian's jaw tightened. You said I needed a wife, not a pedigree. The silence that followed could have frozen the wine in their glasses. Natalie took a small sip and smiled. Guess I'm the unexpected asset. Mrs. Hayes finally spoke, her tone smoother but no less sharp. And what exactly do you do, dear? Natalie hesitated for half a second before answering. Right now? Trying not to spill sauce on this very expensive tablecloth. The room went quiet. Then Julian's mother surprised everyone with a small laugh. Even Julian looked at her, both stunned and impressed. By dessert, the tension had shifted. Mr. Hayes still looked unconvinced, but his wife seemed intrigued. As they left, she whispered to Natalie, It's been a long time since I've seen him defend anyone. Outside, Julian opened the car door for her. You handled that better than I expected, he said. She smirked. You really need to raise your expectations. By the next morning, their dinner had somehow turned into news. A blurry photo of them leaving the restaurant splashed across gossip sites. Millionaire Julian Hayes marries mystery woman in secret ceremony. Natalie stared at the article on her phone, half amused, half horrified. Wow, she muttered. Didn't know I was famous. Julian walked in, already on the phone with his PR team. Control the narrative, he said firmly. Say it was private, not secret. When he hung up, Natalie was still reading the comments. They really think I'm after your money, she said dryly. He glanced up. Aren't you? She threw a pillow at him. Please, if I wanted a rich man, I'd have picked one who smiled. The media circus only got worse. Reporters camped outside the building. His board members sent congratulatory messages, and one even joked about her humble beginnings. Every headline twisted the story, turning their deal into a fairy tale or a scandal, depending on who wrote it. Natalie handled it better than he expected. Let them talk, she said. It's not like the truth would sell. Julian found himself watching her more than the screen, the way she laughed off the rumors, the way she didn't hide from the mess. It was different, refreshing. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He asked. She grinned. A little. It's nice being the villain for once. He didn't admit it out loud, but something about her calm under pressure made him rethink who was really saving whom. The following week felt quieter, but not in a bad way. The chaos outside had slowed down, leaving only the echo of it between them. Julian worked from home more often now, claiming it was for PR control, but Natalie could tell he just didn't want to leave her alone with the cameras. They'd fallen into an unspoken rhythm. Coffee together, sarcastic banter, and glances that lasted a bit too long. One evening she found him in the kitchen, still wearing his tie, sleeves rolled up, reading emails while his pasta overcooked. For a millionaire, you're a terrible cook, she teased, grabbing the spoon from his hand. Delegation is a skill, he replied, leaning against the counter watching her stir the sauce. The tension between them felt familiar now. Easy, addictive. They started spending their nights in the living room, half watching old movies. Natalie made fun of his serious expressions. He mocked her taste in rom-coms. You cry at everything, he said once. No, she replied softly, only when something feels real. That shut him up for a moment longer than usual. One afternoon she caught him smiling at a message on his phone. Who's making you grin like that? She asked playfully. My fake wife, he said without looking up. Her heart skipped before she could hide it. She rolled her eyes, pretending it was just another joke. But deep down it didn't feel like one anymore. Sometimes he'd linger by the window while she read on the couch, his reflection blending with hers. He liked the sound of her voice when she laughed. She liked the rare moments when he forgot to be perfect. Neither said it out loud, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. Late one night, a storm rolled in. Thunder shook the windows, and she found him sitting on the floor by the glass, watching the city lights blur with rain. You okay? She asked. He looked up, a half smile tugging at his lips. I'm starting to think this fake marriage might be the most real thing I've ever done. Natalie sat beside him without answering. The rain kept falling soft and steady, drowning out everything except the quiet rhythm of their breathing. He reached for her hand, slowly, uncertainly, and this time she didn't pull away. The world outside could call it whatever it wanted. For them, it finally felt like something true. It had been 2 weeks since the rain. Things between them were lighter now. Morning coffee, inside jokes, quiet looks that lingered a little too long. Natalie was almost starting to forget the pain she'd escaped, until the past decided to find her. She was leaving a small bookstore one afternoon when a familiar voice called her name. Natalie? She froze before turning around. There he was, her ex-fiancé, the man who'd destroyed everything. He looked different now. Sharper suit, same guilty eyes. You look good, he said softly, like the words could erase what he'd done. You have some nerve, she replied, her tone calm but cold. What do you want? He tried to smile. I made a mistake. I thought I wanted something else, but I was wrong. He reached for her hand and she instinctively pulled away. That's when Julian appeared, his presence cutting through the tension like a blade. He didn't say a word at first, just stepped beside her, his posture protective, his eyes unreadable. Everything okay here? Julian asked, his voice low, controlled. The ex turned defensive. Who are you? Her husband, Julian answered simply. The word hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. Natalie glanced up at him, surprised at how natural it sounded, like he wasn't acting anymore. The ex took a step back, muttered something, and left. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city noise filled the silence, but it couldn't drown the electricity between them. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. I know, Julian replied. But I wanted to. His hand brushed hers briefly, just enough to make her forget that this was supposed to be a deal. They didn't speak for most of the drive home. The silence between them wasn't cold, it was sharp, alive. Julian's jaw tightened every time he glanced at her. Finally, Natalie broke it. You didn't have to play the jealous husband back there. He kept his eyes on the road. I wasn't playing. She blinked, caught off guard. So what was that? Some CEO dominance thing? She asked, her voice half teasing, half defensive. He exhaled slowly. I just don't like seeing people treat you like you're disposable. You don't even know me that well, she snapped. He looked at her then, really looked. I'm starting to. The elevator ride up to the penthouse was thick with silence. She crossed her arms, avoiding his gaze. You're impossible, she muttered. So are you, he said, stepping closer. For a second, the air between them shifted, anger turning into something warmer, something they both refused to name. She moved first, brushing past him. You can't protect me, Julian. That's not part of the contract. He stopped her at the door, his voice lower now. Maybe it should have been. She turned, ready to argue, but the look in his eyes silenced her. There was no arrogance, no performance, just raw honesty. It terrified her more than betrayal ever did. "Good night," she whispered, walking away before he could see her blush. Behind her, he stayed still, hands in his pockets, wondering when pretending stopped feeling like pretending. The next few days passed in silence. Not the angry kind, the heavy kind where words felt dangerous. Julian buried himself in work, spending long hours on calls, pretending not to notice when Natalie entered the room. She pretended not to notice that he'd started leaving 2 cups of coffee instead of 1 on the counter each morning. At night, she'd hear him pacing in his office, his voice low but tense. Once she caught him standing by the window, tie loosened, looking out at the city like it might give him answers. "You think too much," she said softly from the hallway. He turned, surprised, but she was already gone. It was easier to keep their distance than to face what was really changing. Natalie found herself missing their small fights, their sarcastic jokes, even the sound of him saying her name like it meant something. She told herself it was loneliness, the same kind she felt before this whole fake marriage began. But when she saw his jacket draped over her chair one morning, she caught herself smiling. That was new. One evening she walked into the kitchen to find a note beside her coffee. "Don't forget the board gala Friday. Wear red. No signature, no warmth. Just Julian's version of affection." She rolled her eyes but felt her heartbeat quicken anyway. Maybe the silence wasn't a wall. Maybe it was the quiet before something they couldn't ignore anymore. The board's annual gala was the event of the season. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and a sea of polished smiles. Natalie stood at the top of the grand staircase, her red dress catching every light in the room. When Julian saw her, he actually forgot to breathe for a second. "You clean up well," he said, voice low. "You look like trouble," she replied, smiling just enough to make him nervous. They moved through the crowd together, the perfect picture of success. Cameras flashed, people whispered, investors congratulated. Natalie played the role flawlessly. Charming, poised, impossible to ignore. Julian couldn't take his eyes off her. Every laugh, every touch of her hand on his arm blurred the line between performance and something far more dangerous. Midway through the night, his ex-girlfriend appeared, tall, elegant, and clearly calculating. "Julian," she purred, ignoring Natalie completely. "You never mentioned your new wife was lovely." Natalie smiled, sweet but sharp. "He's just full of surprises," she said. Then, before Julian could react, she leaned in and kissed him. Soft, deliberate, electric. The flash of cameras hit them like lightning. His ex stepped back, eyes wide, while Julian stood frozen for half a heartbeat before kissing her back. Not out of obligation, but instinct. When they pulled apart, the room was silent. Natalie smiled politely, whispering, "You're welcome for the headlines," before walking away, leaving him speechless in the middle of the ballroom. The next morning, the internet had already done its job. Every gossip site ran the same photo. Julian and Natalie locked in a kiss under the chandelier, the caption reading, "When business meets passion." She groaned, tossing her phone aside. "Perfect. Now the world thinks I'm in love with you." From across the penthouse, Julian replied dryly, "You're welcome for the PR boost." She turned, glaring at him. "You kissed me back. You kissed me first," he countered. The argument sounded ridiculous, but neither was laughing. "That wasn't part of the deal, Julian." "Maybe the deal changed," he said, voice lower now. The way he looked at her made her forget how to breathe. For a moment, the air between them went still. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You can't deny there's something here," he said quietly. She shook her head, trying to sound calm. "You're confusing habit with feelings." He smiled faintly. "And you're confusing fear with logic." Her chest tightened. He was too close, too right. When she finally turned away, her pulse was racing. "You're impossible," she whispered. "So you've mentioned," he replied. She walked off, pretending the conversation was over. But the heat in her cheeks said otherwise. Julian stood there, watching her disappear down the hall, realizing that for the first time in years, something in his perfectly planned life was completely out of his control. The penthouse was quiet, except for the rain tapping against the windows. Natalie couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the gala, the cameras, the kiss, the way his eyes looked right before it happened. She wandered into the kitchen for water, only to find Julian already there, sitting in the dim light with a glass of whiskey. "You're awake," he said, voice low. "So are you," she replied, leaning on the counter across from him. For a while, neither spoke. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like both were waiting for the other to admit something. Finally, She sighed. You really think pretending can fix everything? He looked at his glass. Pretending's worked for me so far. She studied him. The loosened tie, the tired eyes. You don't look like it's working. He chuckled softly. You're not wrong. The honesty in his tone caught her off guard. You ever wonder if we're just afraid to start over? She asked. He met her gaze. Every damn day. For the first time, he didn't sound like a man who had all the answers. The silence stretched again, gentler this time. Natalie sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. You know, she said quietly, for someone who lives in a penthouse, you're surprisingly human. He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes this time. Don't tell anyone, he murmured. When she laughed, he looked at her, really looked, and in that small, quiet moment, something unspoken finally felt safe. The morning after their late-night talk felt different. There was no tension, no pretending, just quiet comfort. Julian made coffee without asking how she liked it, and somehow it was perfect. Guess I've been paying attention, he said, when she raised an eyebrow. That's new, she teased. He smiled, the kind of smile that stayed with her long after he left the room. Over the next few days, small things began to change. He stopped calling her Mrs. Hayes, like it was a joke. She started leaving her books on his desk, her mug next to his. They moved around each other with the ease of people who had stopped keeping score. One night, he caught her humming in the elevator and found himself memorizing the sound. There was no big confession, no dramatic moment, just the slow, steady merging of two lives that were never supposed to fit. When she laughed, he listened. When he worked late, she waited. The walls of the penthouse felt warmer, softer, as if they were both learning how to live without armor. One evening, she fell asleep on the couch with a book in her hands. Julian found her there, the city lights flickering against her face. For a long time, he just watched her, the woman who'd turned his calculated world upside down. When he finally placed a blanket over her, she stirred slightly, whispering his name in her sleep. That was the moment he knew he was in trouble. It started with a fight, the kind that built slowly, word by word. Julian had cancelled another press meeting because he didn't want reporters prying into their fake relationship. Natalie took it personally. You're ashamed of this, she snapped. Of us. He rubbed his temples. There is no us, Natalie. That was the deal. The words came out harsher than he meant. She laughed, but it wasn't funny. Right, just a deal. Convenient, clean, forgettable. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. You're not walking out in the middle of a storm, he said. Watch me. And before he could stop her, she was gone. Out into the pouring rain, heels splashing through the puddles, like her anger was the only thing keeping her upright. By the time Julian caught up to her outside, the rain had drenched them both. You don't get to run every time things get real, he shouted. She turned, water streaking down her face like tears she refused to shed. You don't get to decide what's real. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by thunder and their unsteady breathing. Then, without thinking, he closed the distance between them. 1 heartbeat. 2. His hand brushed her cheek, and she didn't pull away. I'm sorry, he whispered, but the apology dissolved against her lips as he kissed her. It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of the act. It was desperate, soaked in rain and truth. And when she finally kissed him back, everything else, the storm, the contract, the rules, disappeared. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the silence lingered. Back inside the penthouse, Natalie wrapped herself in a towel, trying to ignore the sound of Julian moving around the kitchen. Neither of them had said a word since that kiss. Every time their eyes met, it felt like lightning could strike again. You should probably change, she muttered. Wouldn't want to catch feelings. He actually laughed, quietly, almost nervously. They ate dinner in near silence, pretending the world hadn't just shifted. He poured her wine. She thanked him without looking up. Finally he spoke. What happened out there? She cut him off before he could finish. It was nothing. Just heat, adrenaline, the storm. Her voice was steady. Her heart wasn't. He nodded slowly. Right, just the storm. But neither of them believed it. Later that night, Natalie lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her lips still tingled, her mind replaying every second. She tried to convince herself it was just confusion, an emotional reaction to chaos. Across the hall, Julian was doing the same, replaying the way she'd looked at him before she walked away. When morning came, they both pretended nothing had happened. Coffee, small talk, the illusion of control. Yet every word, every glance, carried the weight of everything left unsaid. It was safer this way. At least that's what they told themselves. But somewhere deep down both knew the truth. Once a line is crossed, it never really disappears. The week after the storm was strangely quiet. Julian buried himself in meetings, while Natalie avoided the penthouse for hours, wandering through bookstores and cafes just to escape the silence. But fate, or bad timing, had other plans. One morning, an invitation arrived at the door, sealed with the Hayes family crest. The company's annual corporate gala. Attendance mandatory. Julian looked at the envelope like it was a threat. "We don't have to go," he said, knowing they did. "Your father will notice," Natalie replied. "And if we don't show up, the press will too." Their eyes met, both understanding the trap. One night surrounded by people who believed their marriage was perfect, while they could barely look at each other without remembering the rain. When the night came, she walked down the stairs in an emerald dress that made time stop. Julian, adjusting his tie, couldn't find words fast enough. "You look," he started, then gave up. "Dangerous?" she teased. "Exactly." The car ride there was quiet, but not tense. It felt like they were holding their breath, waiting for something neither was brave enough to say first. As the gala lights reflected off the car windows, Natalie glanced at him. "We'll need to act in love again tonight." He turned to her, eyes steady. "Who said we ever stopped?" The question lingered between them as the city lights flashed by, a promise and a warning wrapped in the same heartbeat. The gala was flawless, at least on the surface. Champagne flowed, cameras flashed, and every handshake came with an agenda. Julian played his part effortlessly. Charming, confident, untouchable. But Natalie could feel it. Something in his demeanor had shifted. He smiled at everyone, but his eyes weren't really there. They kept finding her across the room, like gravity pulling him in no matter how far he tried to stand. After hours of polite conversations and fake laughter, she excused herself to breathe. The hall outside the ballroom was dim and quiet, lined with portraits of the Hayes legacy, men in suits, women in pearls, all framed perfection. She was halfway down the hall when she noticed an open door leading into Julian's private office, left unattended. Something about it felt off. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and whiskey. Papers were neatly stacked. Photos lined the desk, but one folder sat apart, open just enough to reveal her name, Natalie Evans. Curiosity froze into disbelief as she opened it. Newspaper clippings, photos, even a few notes in Julian's handwriting, all dated before they ever met. Her hands trembled. This wasn't random. He'd known who she was long before that night at the bar. When he walked in moments later, she was still standing there, file in hand. The look on his face said everything. "You were following me?" she asked, her voice shaking between anger and heartbreak. "No," he said quickly, "not following. I noticed you, months ago." She laughed bitterly. "That's supposed to make it better." He stepped closer, carefully. "You were pitching a project outside one of our buildings. You believed in something no one else cared about. You stood there alone and still smiled. I never forgot that." She wanted to stay angry, but his words hit harder than she expected. "So you turned me into an opportunity?" she said quietly. "At first, maybe," he admitted. "But that night at the bar, that was real. I didn't plan it. I swear." The silence that followed was heavy. Not disbelief, just the ache of truth too complicated to process. Natalie closed the folder and looked up at him. "You built your whole life on control, didn't you? Even love had to fit into a plan." He swallowed hard. "It stopped fitting the moment I met you." That broke her resolve for a heartbeat. The way he said it, quiet, but certain. She wanted to walk away, but her feet wouldn't move. Maybe she needed to believe him. Maybe she already did. Without another word, she placed the folder on the desk and stepped past him. He didn't try to stop her this time, just watched as she disappeared through the door. In that moment, Julian realized he had all the power in the world, yet none of it meant anything if he couldn't hold on to her. And Natalie, walking down that endless hallway, knew one thing for sure. The truth might have broken her trust, but it also proved something she'd never dared to believe. Fate had been working long before she noticed. The gala ended later than anyone expected. The crowd had thinned. The champagne had gone flat and Natalie was ready to disappear. She had smiled, posed, laughed on cue. The perfect wife in a perfect illusion. But underneath it all, something about Julian felt distant. He looked polished, but his silence had sharp edges. When the last toast ended, she excused herself and slipped upstairs to his private office, just needing a moment to breathe. The room was dimly lit, quiet except for the hum of city lights outside the window. Papers covered his desk. Contracts, merger drafts, the kind of documents that built his empire. But what caught her attention wasn't the work. It was a small, worn notebook lying open beside his laptop, a pen resting across the page. Her name was written there, not as a signature or a business note, but in a line of handwriting she didn't expect from him. Natalie makes the noise feel quiet. Just that. No explanation. She stood frozen, her pulse loud in her ears. He had written it like someone confessing something to himself, a truth too dangerous to say out loud. She closed the notebook gently, but not before seeing another half-finished thought underneath. Maybe I'm not pretending anymore. The words hit harder than she wanted to admit. All this time, she'd thought she was the only one slipping, the only one confusing this deal for something real. But here was proof written in his own hand that she wasn't alone in it. When Julian entered moments later, he froze at the sight of her. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, not unkindly, just startled. She held up the notebook. "You're not as unreadable as you think," she said softly. His jaw tightened. "It's nothing, just thoughts." "Thoughts don't look like lies," she replied. Her voice was calm, but her heart wasn't. He stepped closer, every word deliberate. "I didn't mean for you to see that." "Why?" she asked. "Because then you'd have to admit it." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes said everything. Guilt, fear, and something dangerously close to love. For the first time, Natalie saw the man beneath the armor, and it terrified them both. She put the notebook back on his desk and met his gaze one last time. "You can keep pretending, Julian, but you're not fooling either of us anymore." Then she walked out, not angry, just quietly broken. Behind her, he stood frozen, realizing that for a man who'd mastered control all his life, he had finally lost it to the one woman who never tried to take it from him. Natalie didn't remember the drive home, only the feeling of air against her face as she walked out of the hotel. The night was cold, but her thoughts were louder than the wind. Every word in that notebook replayed in her mind like a heartbeat she couldn't shut off. Maybe I'm not pretending anymore. She wanted to hate him for it, but she couldn't, because deep down, she wasn't pretending either. Back at the penthouse, she packed slowly, not because she was sure about leaving, but because she didn't know how to stay. Every corner of the place held pieces of them. Her coffee mug next to his, the red dress draped over the chair, the faint smell of his cologne in the hallway. It wasn't just his world anymore, but it was theirs. That realization hurt more than she expected. Across town, Julian stood in his office, staring out at the skyline. He hadn't chased her. Maybe he thought he didn't deserve to. For the first time in years, he didn't have a plan. No deal, no contract, no strategy. Just the echo of her voice in his head. "You're not fooling either of us anymore." He smiled bitterly. She was right. He picked up the phone twice before setting it down again. Words had always come easily to him, until her. He thought about going to her, explaining everything, admitting that control wasn't love and that he'd never known the difference until now. But what if she didn't believe him? What if the one thing he'd never risked, his heart, wasn't enough this time? Natalie sat by the window, suitcase still open, the city lights flickering below. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired. She'd spent so long trying to build her life around other people. The fiancé who betrayed her, the millionaire who broke her walls only to build new ones. Maybe walking away wasn't weakness this time. Maybe it was strength. And yet, as she closed the suitcase, something in her resisted. Love wasn't supposed to make sense, and maybe that was the point. She glanced at the door, half expecting him to appear, half hoping he wouldn't. When nothing happened, she exhaled and whispered to herself, "If he wants me, he'll come." Across the city, Julian finally grabbed his keys. Some decisions can't be negotiated. They're felt. He didn't know what he'd say when he saw her again, only that losing her wasn't an option anymore. The deal was over. The act was done. This time he wasn't chasing control, he was chasing her. The morning sky over Chicago was gray, the kind of soft light that made everything look quieter. Natalie stood by the window of her old apartment, still in her pajamas, hair slightly messy, lost in thought. She hadn't heard from Julian in days. Maybe that was his answer. Maybe this was how their story ended. Quietly, like most real things do. Then came the knock on the door. When she opened it, he was there, drenched from the rain again, breathless. No suit this time, just Julian, human and imperfect. "You left," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "and I've regretted it every minute since." He stepped closer, eyes steady. "I don't want a deal. I don't want a contract. I just want you." His voice cracked on the last word, and that was what broke her. She tried to fight the tears, but they came anyway. "You're late," she whispered, half laughing. Wouldn't be my first time showing up at the wrong moment, he said, smiling. When he pulled a small box from his pocket, she froze. Julian, no grand speeches this time, he interrupted gently. Just a promise, real, messy, and ours. The ceremony was simple. A courthouse, 2 witnesses, no cameras, no signatures for business. Just them. He couldn't stop looking at her, like she was the only thing that had ever made sense in his carefully built world. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," he didn't hesitate. The kiss wasn't cinematic this time. It was honest. It was home. Later, they walked out into the sunlight, hand in hand. "So," she teased, "does this make me Mrs. Hayes again?" He laughed softly. "No," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "This time it makes you mine." She rolled her eyes, smiling, but didn't let go of his hand. For the first time in years, Julian wasn't thinking about the next meeting, the next deal, or the next move. He was just there, standing beside the woman who taught him that love wasn't about control, but surrender. And as they disappeared into the crowd, both of them knew this wasn't the end of a contract. It was the beginning of forever. Sometimes life breaks you just to rebuild you differently. Natalie thought her story ended with betrayal, but it was only the beginning of something real. And Julian, a man who once measured love in logic and contracts, finally learned that some risks are worth taking, especially the ones that scare you the most. We all face moments that test us, moments that force us to choose between walking away or fighting for something that feels impossible. What would you have done in her place? Would you trust again after heartbreak, or would you build walls too high for anyone to climb? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how you would end this story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Someone out there needs to be reminded that love can start even in the most unexpected places, because sometimes the deal you never planned becomes the forever you didn't believe in.